Hello Internet, it's Matt here for the Dork Lords. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We talk about all manner of dorkly things here, so whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, superheroes, we probably have a playlist about it. Feel free to check us out. Today is another in our Dork Lord of the Rings segments. Today I'm going to talk about the constellation that I believe unifies the races of Middle-earth. Elves, men, dwarves. So here we go. The constellation is called Valacirca. And interestingly, Tolkien kind of used his constellations as a way, as an analog for the real world, right? So what you'll find out as I go through this, Valacirca is actually the Big Dipper. It's kind of still seen in the sky by us folk. But, okay, you go back. This is before the First Age even. So again, thousands and thousands of years. This is during the years of the trees. The great lamps had been destroyed by Melkor, and trees had been planted to provide light. One of those trees was Telperion. Telperion was also called the White Tree. A note that'll come in to play later. So at one point, Varda, one of the Valar, she takes some of the light from Telperion to create stars in the sky. Now at this point too, the elves are just coming awake. And the Valar are worried that Melkor, this evil force that had already destroyed these lamps and was obviously set against the Valar, that he would try to do something horrible to this creation of the elves. So they wanted to warn Melkor away. I'll read this little excerpt from the Silmarillion. This is Varda putting the stars in the sky that she's taken from the light of Telperion. It says, "And high in the north, as a challenge to Melkor, she set the crown of 7 mighty stars to swing Valacirca, the sickle of the Valar and sign of doom." Okay, so interesting there. She set crown of 7 mighty stars to swing. As we know, the Big Dipper's got 7 stars. So this is what we've got. The sickle of the Valar. All right. That constellation, well, they were obviously right as well, because Melkor does try to do horrible things to the elves. It starts up an entire war. There's the war for the sake of the elves. That could make its own video, in fact. But so this warning is set out, though, to say, Melkor, evildoer, beware, because we are vigilant and we're going to, try to thwart you in your ends. And eventually, thousands of years later, the end of the War of Wrath, Melkor is ultimately defeated and sent off into the void. But this constellation is a reminder of this promise, in a way, that the Valar said, we're going to look after the elves and against you, Melkor. So obviously the elves have placed huge importance in these stars, in this constellation. It's in many ways, it's a reflection of them. And so it's a very sacred item to the elves. And eventually, Melkor destroyed the 2 trees as well. He, with Ungoliant. I did an Ungoliant video. The big spider, she sucked the sap, the light from the trees. So Telperion, this tree that had provided the light for the constellation, was destroyed. The elves were so enamored of the white tree of Telperion that they asked for basically an homage to that tree. And the Valar agreed. And so Yavanna makes a big white tree in the elven city of Tyrion. Not Tyrion Lannister. The only difference is it doesn't give off light. Okay, but it's a white tree and it's beautiful and gorgeous. That tree is actually the one that is referenced on the door of the gates of Durin. If you remember the Durin's door, it's on the western gate of Moria, and it was inscribed on by the very famous elf Celebrimbor. And so he etches onto this door, and one of the things he puts amongst the various items is this tree. It's a reference to the white tree that the elves prized so much. Okay, stick a pin in that as well, because we're going to come back to Durin's Door. But that tree, they took seedlings from it, and it went off to other lands and carried those seedlings to other lands. And eventually, one of those seedlings became the white tree on Numenor. And that was obviously the huge symbol for Numenor, and especially for Elendil and his group, the Faithful. When Sauron in the guise of Anatar came to Numenor and started corrupting the folk there, there became a split, and the smaller faction were called the Faithful, and these were people that were basically saying, hey, the Valar are sacred beings that should be worshipped. They are not beings that we should be attacking. Isildur suffers great wounds to try to save a seedling from the white tree when the other side tries to destroy it. It's a big deal. They ended up taking seedlings from that white tree to Middle Earth when they flee the sinking island. Isildur again has a few different times. Sauron tries to destroy the white tree, and Isildur takes a seedling from that tree and replants it, and it gets replanted a couple of times. Finally, there's the white tree in Minas Tirith, what we know about in the Lord of the Rings. That tree has died, and eventually Aragorn finds another seedling, replants it, and after the War of the Ring in the Fourth Age, there is a white tree again. But that tree is also obviously on the symbol for Gondor, right? The white tree of Gondor. So again, that's connected to the elves. The elves have their own version of a white tree, and the humans do too. But also something else on the banner. So the banner has, the white tree of Gondor. What are some of the other things on that banner? It's got 7 stars. So when Elendil fled the sinking island, they took 9 ships. And that, with his kids, with Isildur and such. And so the 9 ships sailed off to the mainland. But 7 of the ships had seeing stones on them. Conventional wisdom is that the 7 stars that are on the banner for Gondor represent the 7 ships that took the seeing stones with them. Which is perhaps is true. I would make the case that, first of all, there weren't 7 ships, there were 9 ships that took off. So why not put 9 stars on there for that? I get it. Only 7 of them were used, one per Palantir in terms of, but those ships also, their sails had a star on them, and that's, I guess, each ship had a star on it, hence the 7 stars. I would also say though that if ships were the actual thing, maybe you put an icon of a ship on there. I think there is I think it can be 2 things at once. It can be a reference to the 7 ships that brought the seeing stones with them. And I think it's also a reference to the Sickle of the Valar, the Constellation. These people were the faithful. That was their whole point, was they were faithful to the Valar and worshiped them. They knew what the significance of the Sickle of the Valar was. And so in a way, by putting that on their banner, I think Elendil is saying, we are followers of the Valar, again, evildoers like Melkor, or his follower Sauron, who is basically, as soon as they land, they almost immediately, it's a very short period of time before the War of the Last Alliance takes place, and they're dead set against Sauron. They have a score to settle. And I think those 7 stars are their way of saying, we know you, and we are going to fight the evildoer known as Sauron. So that is the significance for men. You also do see this, just FYI, that Tolkien sprinkles in references to the Sickle of the Valar every once in a while. There's a reference in The Hobbit. There's a reference in the tale of Beren and Luthien, and in Lord of the Rings, there's a bit where Frodo, I'm going to read the real fast here. Frodo sees the constellation. It says, Frodo saw that the night was still clear. The sickle was swinging bright above the shoulders of Bree Hill. and then he shuts the shutters and closes, whatever. But it's just kind of, it's showing how ever present this constellation is, and it's seen by what seem to be the heroes of our story. Now let's go to the dwarves. I mentioned the door of Durin. It had the white tree inscribed on it. Another thing it has inscribed on it is the crown of Durin, and it's got 7 stars along the top. The reason for this is the legend says that Durin, the first Durin the Deathless, when he awoke and he wandered south through Middle-earth until he came to this very clear lake. It's the Mirror Mare. And when he looked into it, much like Galadriel's mirror, right? She pours water into the basin and then you can see visions. In this case, it's a natural occurring basin in a way that's also a mirror. So the mirror, he looks into it. It's broad daylight, but he can see the night sky reflected in this pool. And also notably, this night sky reflects the constellation. Well, 7 stars. A constellation with 7 stars. It does not say it's the Sickle of the Valar. I would make the case that that's exactly what it is. But he sees a constellation with 7 stars that form a crown upon his head. And he takes that as a sign that this is where the dwarves should build. And so he does, because the Mirror Mare is just outside the eastern gate of Khazad-dûm. And so that is the origin of Moria. It's the origin of Khazad-dûm, is this sign that Durin takes, like, this is where my people should build. And he does, and obviously, you know the rest of the story. But those 7 stars obviously then become very pivotal to the dwarves. And so they put it ends up on the door of Moria, right? These 7 stars again. Just as a further clarification that I think this particular constellation is the same one. It's not like a different constellation of 7 stars. If I take you back to the first quote I read, which was when Varda placed the Sickle of the Valar into the sky, the way it's described in the Silmarillion is, she set the crown of 7 mighty stars to swing Valacirca, the Sickle of the Valar. So there's even the word crown is put into the initial description of this constellation. So the dwarves have also built the 7 stars, specifically, I believe, to this constellation into their mythology. Just as an interesting side note, too, I find it interesting that there were 7 dwarves named Durin. There's Durin the first, second, third, fourth, and the final one, Durin the 7th, comes in the 4th age, comes after the War of the Ring. And he helps reclaim Moria, rebuilds it to its former glory, and they have several, years of peace until kind of the end of the time of the dwarves living there. So in some ways, there's a reclaiming of the land that was originally found by Durin the First, and the fact that there's 7 of them. Maybe you could even say the 7 stars represent each of the 7 Durins, the line of Durin, of which obviously Thorin Oakenshield is a part. But there's those 7 Durins perhaps are each of those 7 stars as well. So anyway, there you go. I just thought it was really interesting that there is this through line of the white tree, which obviously the elves respect, worship in a way. So do our humans. And the tree is inscribed on the door of Moria. And then you've got the stars from this constellation. The elves obviously revering it as this sign from the Valar that the Valar, care for them and are willing to go to war to save them. And for the humans, the sense that these stars are also a symbol of their faith and their renewed commitment to destroy the evil that is Sauron. And for the dwarves, the fact that this constellation was this sign that they should build on what became the greatest dwarven kingdom in Tolkien's history. So there you go, everybody. The Valacirca. Feel free to leave some comments if you've got some thoughts on this. And yeah, if you have comments, if you have thoughts for another video topic you'd like me to talk about, another Tolkien topic, feel free to put them in the comments. I'd love to do a video on the topic of your choice. So thanks, everybody. Talk to you later.